It's 26 degrees here in Abuja. Good morning, welcome Sunrise Daily. I'm Nat'l.
Indeed, your daily dose of sunshine is right on right now. I'm Maupe Ogunyusu. Good morning.
And talking about sunshine, it is bright. Bright and likely to get as hot as 33 degrees here in Abuja. But guess what? In the United Kingdom, as that yesterday it was about -2 degrees.
Oh dear.
So, and I know that in Jos, about that, it's really about this time, it's really very cold and just cozy. Enough for you to just see. But just beside Jos, beside or above, I don't know again, Bauchi. Around just Plateau State, you have Bauchi, and that's what we're going to look at now. It is a serene and beautiful place. Also very sunny and bright. Bauchi.
Indeed, we're showing you visuals of the government reservation area. Some people say it's government rejected area, but I can tell you that when you look at this particular visual, you will be seeing no rejection there. It certainly does look lovely. The government reserved area around Old Airport, and there's an airstrip around there. Really, really, really beautiful. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, why are we all stuck up in the big cities? You know, what's the big deal with Lagos and Abuja? Why aren't we spreading our tentacles to other cities? You know, if you do have a source of living, you know, these other places will really make a good place to be able to raise a family, you know, earn a source of living.
Mark, I do agree with you. I mean, look at that site. It's green. In the midst of all the buildings, it is green. And just speaks of serenity. But you know that in other climes, the wealthy usually live on the outskirts, and they allow the low-income earners to live in the city center. But it looks like it's the reverse. The reverse is the case in Nigeria. The wealthy want to stay in the city center, and the low-income earners are the ones going to the outskirts. But it doesn't look like that here in Bauchi. It's a beautiful place.
Indeed, it is. And talking about the sun, I mean, I always tell people, don't get fooled. Don't let the morning weather fool you. Yes, it is nice and cozy, and as Nyota did say, it's a lovely 27 degrees right now. But he also told you by around 33 degrees in the afternoon, you'll be wondering who is competing with the sun. You know, sun, can you take it easy?
It just points to some of the things that we need to look at when we talk climate change or sustainability, or climate change. The sun's a resource.
Indeed,
that can be harnessed, especially in this part of the world where we can harness the sun to provide power, and it's just rich. I don't know how to put it again. But let's not look at the negative side of it. Let's see the good side of it, how we can harness the sun's resources to provide electricity, to even cook. And people are coming up with innovations where you can tap from the sun's rays and do your cooking. It's possible.
Please, it doesn't mean you should put out your pot in direct sunlight. You'll get a different type of cooking.
It won't work for you that way.
Well, people have already learned to harness the sun. It's just that we need to, you know, invest more in technologies to help us harness the energy that the sun provides. But we know that it's at this time of the year, I mean, even since time immemorial, that our people have been using the direct sunlight of the sun to preserve foodstuff.
True.
But we also need to know that we need to find other ways, because this is also the time when we now begin to record cases of Lassa fever as a result of the fact that people just put their produce directly on the roads, and, you know, they come in contact with these rats, and that's when we always have this, you know, uptick in the cases of Lassa fever. We're hoping that will not be the case now. We're hoping that, you know, there will be lessons learned, and that there will be more efforts educating people, especially our rural population, on the hazards of, you know, trying to harness the sunlight directly by using it on the floor. I mean, there are many more creative ways if we would just apply ourselves a bit more to harness and
if I could just tell you about
energy of the sun.
This community in Benue State, what they did was to build a mini structure that with, I think, aluminium sheets.
And they're above the ground.
And above the ground. So because they use aluminium sheets, what happened is absorbs the heat and dried up their products for them. So they will come in individuals, put in their products for 2-3 days, move it out, and another set will bring it in, just to preserve the products in a healthy and safe environment. So it's something you just have to, as I say, think about it and get to work.
Indeed.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, so what are the papers saying?
Yes, and then let's go and see what the papers are saying today. What are the headlines that you'll be seeing out there if you've not already seen them? Here we go, going into the papers. And I'll start out with the Guardian newspaper. Woof. Naira plunge stalls FG states capital projects, spikes costs by 75%. You find that story on page 6 of the Guardian, and then you see the infographics there. Cement price nearly triple, iron rods hit record highs, MDA struggle to adjust budgets amid exchange rate crisis, projects face uncertainty as contractors demand reviews. All of these are things hindering the execution of projects according to the federal and state government. But below that, you see a plethora of other headlines. Senate sacks CCT chairman Danladi Umar is on page 5. Disco's action threatening economic stability, reps declare, is on page 5 as well. And then NNPC exporting 4.7 million barrels of new crude to Spain, US. That you'll find on page 18. But that's it from the Guardian.
Let's take a look at Daily Trust. The lead story right now says reps ask discos to raise investment to 500 billion naira or exit. There's a lead story on the front page of Daily Trust. They also have this writers say their threat to economic stability, welfare of Nigerians. Liabilities, low capacity fuel call for recapitalization. Lawmakers should demand accountability from electricity companies, this according to an expert. And the discos are quiet through all of this. Disco's mom is the last rider to that particular story on the front page of Daily Trust.
Well, let's talking about the daily here. Let's go on to Daily Times, and they have this one to lead with. FAC. FG states LG share 1.14 trillion naira for October 2024. That's a lead story on Daily Times. And then you see the picture of the governor-elect of Ondo State, Aida Ture, with his certificate of return from INEC there. It's a big picture you have there. And I think that's his wife beside the INEC rep. I'm not too sure. But above the nameplate, you have this one. 58-year-old Algerian arms dealer arrested in Zamfara. You find that story on page 6, details of that. And then the one beside it reads, Oshomole opposes son's appointment as Edo commissioner. That's on page 2. That's
yeah, that came from the interview we had with the deputy governor yesterday on Sunrise Daily. So yeah, the story was that he didn't support his son's nomination, but he's been appointed. So I'm sure the House of Assembly will pass it. But Vanguard newspapers is focusing on security. Terrorists from Mali, Burkina Faso, and northwest Niger states, is according to the Senate. They're raising an alarm there. Tasks military on early warning mechanism. DHQ confirms killing of 5 soldiers in Borno terrorist ambush. Troops neutralize 30 terrorists. So that is all on the front page of the Vanguard newspapers this morning. And of course, you also have your Mr. and Mrs. A Daily Dose is also there. The Thursday. I'll still let you do it yourself. Let's leave it there for Vanguard newspapers.
Blueprint has this one to lead with. Beyond Tinubu's policies, North must evaluate its leaders. That's coming from ACF, that's Ira Consultative Forum. And they have this writers. Floats ACF radio station to amplify voice of region. Senate worries over Lakura invasion of Sokoto Kebbi. Charges military over Nigeria-Niger border, Burkina Faso, Mali infiltration. That's Blueprint newspaper. And then Tinubu sacks Nnamdi Azikiwe Varsity Council VC registrar. That's it from Blueprint's newspaper.
And the Nigerian Tribune has this: we will back northern candidates in 2027. That's according to the Arawa Consultative Forum. Fault Tinubu's policies as they relate to northern region. That's the lead story on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune.
Yeah, the New Telegraph says insecurity. It ties into the other headline from
The Arewa Consultative.
Arewa Consultative Forum. North under siege, people may not be alive to reap reforms benefits. ACF speaking there. But at the bottom you see a political story. PDP Damagum rallies state chairman support ahead of November 8th NEC meeting.
Now, speaking of the PDP, the Daily Independent has this: North-Central disunity may push Damagum to complete IU's tenure. So that story is still right there. Party governors to meet Saturday to take decision ahead of NEC meeting. That's the lead story there. State chairman denied passing vote of confidence in Damagum acting chair. That's the lead story on the front page of Daily Independent.
All right, let's go on as we round up this Nigeria. Energy crisis. This Nigeria is the next one. Disco's activities threat to economy. Reps declare. Urge FG to categorize them as non-state actors. What would that mean? Would they be banned or asked to leave Nigeria? Well, that's the lead story on This Nigeria. And at the bottom you have this one. Senate approves sack of Conduct Tribunal chair over alleged misconduct. You find that story, details of that, on page 5, and that's This Nigeria.
And Blueprint has this: beyond Tinubu's policies, North must evaluate its leaders. That's according to the ACF. And they also have this story: Tinubu sacks Nnamdi Azikiwe Varsity Council VC and registrar. That story also broke yesterday. Well, that's where we'll have to leave it for Blueprint.
And that's where we'll leave it for the look at some of the headlines and some of the dailies. Sunrise Daily will be back in a moment. Please stay with us.
Advisor is leading dignitaries including the Minister of Interior, the Chief of Defense Staff, Chief of Army Staff, Chief of Naval Staff, the Commandants General of the Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps, as well as heads of paramilitary agencies to this meeting.
I hereby inaugurate.
It is the official inauguration of the federal government's Council for the Coordination and Protection of Critical National Assets and Infrastructure, aimed at addressing the recent spike in vandalism of national infrastructure.
Critical national assets and infrastructure which undergird our transportation system, energy grids, communication networks, and essential services are the backbone of our society. However, in an ever-evolving landscape, fraught with challenges, these assets are also facing growing threats from various sources, including criminal terrorists. As National Security Advisor, I am delighted and honored to inaugurate the Federal Coordinating Council for Critical National Assets and Infrastructure Protection, which will midwife our efforts in the protection of Nigeria's critical national assets and infrastructure.
Recent vandalism of national electrical installations threw parts of the country into darkness, affecting businesses and impacting negatively on security and economy. However, the newly inaugurated council is expected to provide guidance to prevent, arrest, and restore vandalized assets.
What is happening in Nigeria today is it's just about any dying insecurity situation. They start looking for infrastructures, they start looking for soft targets, and they start looking at how to hit targets that they are hitting. But obviously, with this particular council, I'm so happy that the end has come for those vandalism and various threats that we have in terms of our critical infrastructure. And of course, the NSCDC core responsibility is to protect critical national assets. And I think with this initiative today, that has come to life.
We must continue to lay emphasis on the need for domestic and international cooperation to protect local and regional connectivity projects based on respect for international law and fulfillment of bilateral and multilateral obligations towards international and regional organizations and initiatives.
The National Security Advisor chairs the council, while the Minister of Interior serves as the co-chair of the council. All heads of security agencies and paramilitary agencies are members of the council.
And that is where our conversation will be starting off from. We have joining us virtually retired Major General Henry Ayola, former Commander Special Task Force Operation Safe Haven. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Neota. Good morning.
And good morning to you. It's been a while.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Indeed. So let's start off from that point. This council has been inaugurated for the protection of critical national assets. Let's get your take on that first.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the first thing really is to salute the wisdom and the initiative, which actually is long overdue, but thank God it's coming at this time. But there are many things involved. I haven't praised this initiative. There are a number of things that must be done immediately to follow up in order to make sure that we situate this action within the statutory functions and statutes and acts that are in place. Ordinarily speaking, this kind of council should come as one of those commissions, executive bodies, that you have enshrined, established by Section 153 of the Constitution, and then you have them outlined in the third schedule, and then Part 1 in particular, that had a long list of them, the commissions and the council. If we take the example of the United States, they have the National Security Council, and then they have the Homeland Security Council. Rather than just focusing on critical infrastructure and assets, I think it should be, we can make it holistic. It's a good start point. In fact, that's exactly what they did in response to 9/11 attacks. It was on that same October, the month following the 9/11, October that year, 2001, the president signed an executive order establishing the Homeland Security Council. And then it was quickly followed up by an executive directive later in that month. And then by 2002, it was then codified, and then you then had the Home Security Act itself that now put it in proper, legal framework, so that it could become a body that can, that the National Assembly can legislate for, and budgetary functions can then follow. I would advise that we follow that track. This is good as a start point. And then, of course, we have to bring in, when you now have, in our own case, since we don't call ours Homeland Security, what we have is Interior. So I would suggest Interior Security Council or Internal Security Council, better still. Of course, the ministry is Ministry of Interior. That's the main ministry, the core ministry. But then, so we can call it Internal Security Council, in which case we cannot have it's actually a replication of the National Security Council itself, even for the US, with just additional security agencies that got to do with internal security. And in our case, so if you look at the National Security Council, which is made up of the president as the chairman, the vice president as the deputy chairman, then you have the chief of defense staff, you have the Minister for Interior, Minister for Defense, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and then you have the National Security Advisor, and then you have the Inspector General of Police. Those are the 8 statutory members of the National Security Council. So if we take our cue from that to now have Internal Security Council, we can then have, in addition to those, we need to have the Minister of Finance. In our case, because we don't have a Minister of Energy, so we have to have 2 ministers instead of 1. The Minister for Power, and then the Minister for Petroleum, maybe 3, or even the Minister for Transportation may have to come in. Then, of course, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, and the Ministry of Health and Human Services. Now, these are very critical sectors within the security, internal security of the nation. So if we have that, then it becomes a holistic approach to solving all the internal security issues, including the non-kinetic approach we've been talking about in dealing with terrorism and insurgency. We've more or less left everything to the military. We should have actually had this kind of council that would take care of the non-kinetic aspect so that the military can then face the kinetic aspect and give us the best in the circumstance.
It's interesting the angle that you have approached this from. I mean, you have likened this council, you've commended it, and you seem to want an expansion of it, you know, not just in the security area, but also in the non-security area. However, given the example that you've given, that we're taking it, you know, we should copy what it is that the United States has, you know, the establishment of the Homeland Security, which they did in the wake of 9/11. 9/11 was a major terrorist attack on the Twin Towers. You all remember how that went down, and a day that, you know, the world watched in horror as those airplanes hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. They did an investigation and they came up with the knowledge that there was no, even though there was knowledge of what was going to happen, there was a lack of coordination amongst the security agencies. And so that led them to establish the Homeland Security Unit. In Nigeria, would you say that we have done such an investigation to see what it is that we're lacking? Because this has been set up, this council has been set up to protect what we consider national infrastructure, coming in the wake of major power lines being felled in the forest somewhere in Niger State. Has there been any critical investigation to, you know, find out what precisely could have led to that? What are the gaps in our information or, in our security information management or intelligence management that has now necessitated the establishment of this National Security Council?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy you're taking it from that dimension. Now, let's look at it more closely. I don't even think we need any special investigation because these ought to be one of the statutory, you know, executive bodies, you know, that should have been there as part of the structures and institutions of national security architecture. So we didn't even need to wait for any incident. That's why I say it's long overdue. Let's look at the United States again. Following the 9/11, many, you know, responses, you know, were immediately activated. Number one, you talked about, okay, the establishment of Homeland Security Department came up. But first of all, there was the creation of the Office of Director of National Intelligence. We don't have that in our setting up to now. Even with all the insecurity, you know, terrorism, insurgency that we have had. It just shows that we have not responded sufficiently to the security environment we have been facing in the last over 10 years, you know. And so by now, we should have, I know the Office of the Security Advisor could play that role, but then it has to be, it's not something that is supposed to be assumed. It has to be put in there. And that's why I've been advocating all the while, that the National Security Agencies Act that created the Office of the National Security Advisor ought to have been, you know, amended, reviewed and amended and made more consolidated and comprehensive than it is today. You know, if that had been done, then we would have had, you know, either we make the same NSA or make a different person who technically would be an intelligence security person, you know, I mean, with that kind of background, to become the Director of National Intelligence. Or if we want to combine it with the Office of the National Security Advisor, it's also good. Now, that's number one. They also came out with what they call the USA Patriot Act, that uniting, strengthening America by providing appropriate tools to obstruct terrorism act. That's the USA Patriotic Act. Now, they also came up with the TSA. So remember, the airports in America used to have individual, each airport had its own security body that was responsible. But from the experience and lessons learned, they now consolidated it to the national, what they call the TSA, now Transport Security Administration. Now, that was not all. They went ahead also to now jig all of the security and intelligence agencies, the 18 official ones, and the private one, the private sector ones, all together to create a stronger national intelligence community, which the Director of National Intelligence sits over, and oversees and coordinates, so that those gaps between intelligence gathering, collating, dissemination, and the ability to consolidate and have a convergence, have the intelligence sharing environment, having fissions, centers, having a coordinated tasking of the intelligence agencies. All of those things, we have not done much in those areas. We have so much to do. And that's why you find that we just dumped everything at the door of the armed forces, and everybody else went to sleep. That's more or less what it has been. So we need to wake up and put more of these things in place so that we can free the military to do the kinetic part of their work, and then we will be able, the other agencies will be able to take care of this non-kinetic. And I'm saying that when we say security, don't forget, I'm not looking at just defense. I'm looking at the entire gamut of the security sector, all the subsectors, and that's why of course transportation, energy, and all of that are coming, including health, because human security is gone beyond just physical security today. So all of those security-related ministries and agencies that need to be brought in need to, to come into, so that there can be a synergy of activities, and then we can have a good punch in one direction. What we've been doing are more or less knee-jerk reactions to, incidents and activities of the adversaries and all of that. We need to sit down and have a deliberate, conscious, consensuous, painstaking brainstorming that will give us all of these things that are required to have a robust security architecture for the nation.
I'm just wondering, where is this critical thinking? Because when countries come up with this, they don't just bring it from up out of the blues. Especially when they have to do it for the very first time. There must be a body responsible for the critical thinking involved in needing to bring the establishment of some of these, security apparatus, as you have listed. Where should that thinking be happening in Nigeria? Yes, we've seen the establishment of this, is it council now? Yes, it's a council. But if it's just to protect national infrastructure, someone will say, isn't that what the NSCDC was set up to do? Are we saying that they're unable to do it? Has there been something that has happened that we found out that there needs to be a more coordinated effort in establishing this particular council?
Yeah, thank you very much. Rightly put, you have said it that the Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps, they have that as their primary task of protection of critical national assets and infrastructure. Of course, it goes beyond them, because when you look at the outlay of what we refer to as critical assets and infrastructure, certainly agencies like custom, immigration, they're all involved. Of course, that's why the Ministry of Interior is actually more or less the core ministry. All of that, we just have supportive role, and because their own assets are also involved. But let's look at it this way. I've always made this point about the nation. The work of moving a nation forward, of developing a nation, is not just that of those in politics or those in power. We have not been able to craft a system of systems that makes room for harnessing all the human resources, all the intellectual resources, all the institutional resources that are within Nigeria. That is the problem. We've been having a situation where leaders, in fact, it's made worse by politics, because in politics, we have seen it over the year. Politics trumps up any kind of character. Some people who have never done anything, successfully in their life, they just find themselves to be political leaders, and they are toying with our lives and doing experiments with us and all of that, because that's what politics are trumped up. It's a different, and I remember there was a government when I'm not in support of military regime, but I remember during the military regime, there was a government that tried to put in a kind of having political bureaus in the parties, so that there is a way of milling leaders, even at the party level, where they will be trained, they will be nurtured, they will be mentored, and there will be, before they come out to the open to even vie for any office, you can take for granted certain level of training, education, and exposure. And unfortunately, we didn't follow that line. Again, if we have a system of systems where it's not just one person coming in and just riding roughshod of the entire system and just not allowing, not even getting to know how the system runs, and just wants to do his own, just enforce his own and foist his own agenda. Look at it, even in this government. I remember when the cabinet was formed and some of the parastatals had their chief executives and all of that. So I don't know if you watched that. How many of them, when they got to the ministries, took maybe the first 1 week to be briefed, department by department, to get to know what exists, what's on ground. And you find some, the very day they got to the ministry, they started issuing orders as if they are, even military regimes don't operate like that, as if they know everything already even before they came there. No, you don't run a system that way. A system must be crafted. If you get to a new, even if you have worked there before and you were away for 1 day, it just costs you to even say, okay, I've been away from here. You guys brief me. What are the new things you've been doing since I left?
General,
how are you doing them? What are the procedures and processes? What are the rules and regulations we have to keep? And this has affected the nation in all sectors.
Major General, if I may come in here, if I may come in, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted if we could streamline a little bit. Because the question I had in mind, which you're already going towards, is to ask you, which one is a more critical asset that should be protected? The people or the hard infrastructure? Because so far, the focus has been on protecting the critical hard infrastructure. But some will argue that the biggest national asset that ought to be protected, and you mentioned it, harnessing the people resources towards the security that we're seeking to have. Is it a question of reorientation of those in leadership, or helping them to see that we need to look at building our people in order to have the security we desire?
Yeah, thank you very much. Like you rightly said, I touched on human security. I think it was the former president of America, the 35th president, John F. Kennedy, who said that our progress as a nation can be no swifter than our progress in education. Our fundamental resource is the human mind. Now, it is very true. And that's why it's a system that takes care of things like that, where you have made deliberate room, you have given room for individual resources to be harnessed, okay, right from the lowest level to the national level, such that there are provisions for inputs coming from different, first individual, then institutions, and so that there can be a handshake between the bureaucracy and the technocracy of a nation. That's how nations run. It's known all over the world that the best hands and the best heads really are usually outside government. Because government is a small part of your own nation. The private sector has the larger chunk of human beings and human resources. And so it's a deliberate handshake that you create. Now, let me give an example of that. In policy process, for example, and that's another problem where we are flip-flopping with our policies, because we have not followed policy process in framing them. In policy process, if you follow the 5-stage model, there are several models, there are 4 stage, 5, 7. But if you use the 5 stage where we talk about setting the agenda, which is stage 1, stage 2 is policy formulation, stage 3 is policy adoption and administration, stage 4 is policy implementation, and stage 5 is policy evaluation. Now, if we follow these 4 stages of policy process in churning out, in crafting our policies, you'll find that we'll not be making these mistakes, because there are even softwares of simulating a policy upfront. Play it, know what problems it's going to generate, how you are going to handle those problems, all done before you come out with the policy. So the idea of there's no such thing as a verbal policy in the first place. That you make one statement and it becomes a policy. No, sir, there's no such thing. And these are the things that ensure that the human resources are tapped. In policy evaluation, for example, which is the fifth phase, which is actually meant to evaluate the policy you are put in place on annual basis, if you like. I mean, depending on how practicable it is, such that you bring technocrats who are experts in that field to the subsector concerned. They will look at what you have done over the time, look at the policy goals that were set, look at what you have achieved. If there's a gap, what are we not doing right? What can we do to do it better? And do all of that. And that provides a deliberate handshake between the technocrats and the bureaucrats. Okay? And that's how nations, kind of up their game and, kind of tweak the skills and competencies of the public sector. All of these things are supposed to be there. Let me remind you, in 1985, between 85 and 88, there was this civil service reform that brought about having what we call the common departments to all ministries. One of them is the one called Department of Planning, Research and Statistics. Now, the design and the theory behind that, the grand plan behind that was that department was supposed to be the hub of every ministry, where the thinking, like Mark said, where the strategic thinking and planning is done for that ministry. So that it's not a minister that comes and just start doing what he feels like doing. There should have been a plan in place. All we need to do is to know where the last minister stopped, and it will continue from there. That ensures first that you engender the best. Secondly, it ensures continuity, it ensures convergence of ideas, and it ensures that there is a smooth takeover also. Even our handling and takeover procedures, we take care of all of that so that there is no institutional loss of memory. I mean, as it has been for most of the time.
Who would draw up that document? Who would have the responsibility to draw up that document that whoever is coming would have to follow through? Who draws it up?
You don't even need another document. I'm saying that these structures are already there. In all the ministries, you have Department of Planning, Research and Statistics. They are there. But you see, what has happened over the years is that different regimes, different leaders have come, and what we have found is that they run roughshod of the civil service so badly. I mean, I've had the opportunity of serving in two ministries, Ministry of Communication, Ministry of Defense, working with the minister. And I've seen how hard it is for civil servants to remind the politicians that, look, this is what the civil service regulation says about this. And they just want to do their own thing and just move on and all that. And with that, over the years, the civil service have more or less been made prostrate, if I may lie. Not willingly, but because people have just, right from I was old enough to know right from 1975. 1975, the civil service have been more or less the whipping child of the public service. And from generation to generation, from regime to regime, rather than recognizing that these are, it's a workforce that is very critical to moving the nation forward. No matter your policies and programs and projects, the implementers are still the civil servants. So if you ignore them, you ignore the processes that have been put in place, you don't listen to them, then that's what brought us to where we are. Those things are already there. We just need to go back to them. And then to ensure that people don't just come and just ignore. We have this, I think it's an African elite mentality. I call it kabiyesi or feudal mentality, where we want to do what we like, how we like, when we like, if we like. And we don't want to, when we are reminded about, this is the procedure or process for doing it, say, hey, put that aside. Or they say, you are speaking English. No, please. That's how nations who succeed work. They work by systems. I think I've talked about this book, Why Nations Fail, by Achimogu and Robinson. That book made an argument about what makes a difference between nations that are doing well and those that are not doing well, as the system that they put in place. And when I say system, that goes all the way from policies to strategies to institutions to structures to procedures to processes to routines and checklists and drills for doing everything. so that people don't just come in trying to look tough, and they are just running arbitrarily and reducing the whole system to as if it's their household they are running. That is how nations work. In fact, that book gives an example of the Nohalis, who you have some of them in America and some in Mexico. And the point they were making is the fact that it's not their forefathers, it's not the stars, their destiny is not determined by their geography and all of that, but by the system that each nation has put in place that is able to sustain development, is able to create a system where hard work is recognized and rewarded, where there are laws, they are made justiciable, and there is swift, stiff, sure sanction for dereliction from those laws. All of these things are part of what makes a system to work. These are the things. These are fundamentals we must go back to as a nation.
Well, right now we do have this council coordinating council for critical national assets and infrastructure protection. We now have it. Well, I mean, we can wish that it is expanded. We can wish that, it is fancier than it actually sounds. The thing is, we want it to work. We want our assets protected. It's not right that an entire region of a country was out of electricity for many days, almost running into weeks as a result of infrastructure, critical national infrastructure being attacked. So where else would you be saying we should be deploying these members of this council to now that they have been inaugurated? There certainly are expectations of them, aren't there?
Yeah, thank you very much. Now you can see why I'm saying that we need to go further. Thank God, and I appreciate the initiative of the president, the NSA, and so on. Now, this council is as critical as the National Security Council. I mean, properly put, this inauguration actually would have been done by the president himself if he was in town, I'm sure. Because it's a high-level council. It's supposed to be one of those councils enshrined that Schedule 3 and Part 1. And what that then means that there will be a concept note, a concept paper that will outline first the membership, the constitution, the organization, the functions, and then the framework for collaboration, for synergy, for working together, so that it's not left to, because I like the face of who is the Minister of Interior, or the Minister of the Interior is a friend to the NSA, so things are working. So a year or a time when you have where they are not such close friends, then no, you don't run a nation based on how you feel or whether you like somebody's face or not. And that's why we must go further to put proper, acts in place that will spell out these details. You see, in Nigeria, we are so good in expecting things to happen without doing what is required to be done to make it happen. Things don't just happen. They are made to happen. I mean, look at it. Even where we have clearly spelled out rules and regulations, people still try to breach them. Is it where you just make one gesture of, oh, let's come together, let's do something? Nations don't run on goodwill. You run on rules and regulation, processes and procedures, drills and routines that must be complied with, and there must be spelled out sanction for anybody who runs rancor of them. And also, that needs to be put as an immediate follow-up, so that all the agencies that are involved will know themselves. If they are going to be quarterly meetings, or if they are even going to train together somewhere, especially the operational agencies, there has to be coordinated joint trainings, unified training, that will cover all of these things. I mean, I looked at the acts that established the National Security and Civil Defense Corps, okay, that gives that function, simply put. Okay, but they cannot do it alone. In the National Disaster Response Plan, we also have what we call National Disaster Units, or response units, even among the units of the armed forces. That's when the push comes to shove and you have to call out the military. There are battalions that are earmarked for that purpose. There are training they ought to have done in peacetime with immigration, with custom, with civil defense, with the Ministry of Health, with humanitarian department, or with former NEMA used to coordinate. I used to be in charge of the Armed Forces Simulation Center. And we used to have such simulation exercises for all of these agencies and ministries that are concerned. I don't know whether we're still doing it, but these are things that must be done, because the National Emergency Management Agency, for example, as it used to be, even though it's under Humanitarian Affairs Ministry now, they didn't have any of those agencies under them. They are only supposed to coordinate people that are not under their control. Now, that itself does not function well. I had the opportunity of leading a set of students to Senegal some years ago, from the Staff College. And one of the lessons we learned from what the French people have, they call it sapeurs-pompiers, is that they train their emergency management agency, which are pulled together under the Ministry of Interior, the search and rescue, fire service, search and rescue for all the terrain, maritime, air and land, all of them, all of those agencies, they are pulled under one structure that is directly, that the Minister of Interior can task directly. And so you don't have to start begging the person coming from one ministry or the other to show up. And that was, and not only that, they actually start out trained in military institutions. Okay, they train in the depot, like recruits are trained for the army. They go there, get trained. The officers also go to the academy. But they come out and then they are posted to that department, and they now start, specialist training, got to do with their different area. Either you are doing search and rescue or fire service and all of that. Now, that is a very functional system.
It's interesting, General, sorry to interrupt you once more. It's interesting that you're even citing examples of other African countries, neighboring African countries, who can show us an example of how this can be effectively run. You mentioned that the NSCDC cannot do it alone. Is it that they cannot do it alone, or that they have not been empowered sufficiently to be able to do it? Because, when we're talking about infrastructure protection, some people will talk about having the facilities, having the requisite training, having the capacity. Is it that they cannot, or we have not made the investment that we ought to empower them to do it?
Yeah, thank you so very much. Our case is a case that, ordinarily you will say it's an abnormal setting. I remember in 1988, I had the opportunity of going to Japan with the then minister. And I remember during our discussion with the Japanese telecom sector, we were complaining about people cutting our telephone cables. And I could see the eyes of one of the guys looked at us, excuse me, does that happen anywhere in the world? Because we're dealing with very abnormal situation. Ordinarily, you don't expect somebody, in his sane mind to think of going to destroy something that serves the common good. It doesn't, it's not even contemplated in other times. So when you have a bad situation and an abnormal situation, you also have to go the extra mile to deal with it. And that's what is happening. That's what I'm saying. Ordinarily, if they were just to protect those critical assets and infrastructure with the mindset, we're taking for granted that no citizen in his right mind will go and try to cut electrical cable or telephone cable or destroy pylons carrying power lines and all of that. Then they would have been sufficient to do that. But we are having something abnormal, so we have to also go the extra mile to be able to deal with that. That's why I make that point.
What is the extra? Because it would seem that from what you have spelled out, there is an extra to what it is that the NSCDC will be expected to do, or that this council is now expected to do in place of the NSCDC.
Yeah, well, that's obvious now from what the council is set out to do. And as I said, there have to be documents outlining properly the rules of this council and the tasking of this council and all the agencies and ministries that will be involved, and outline what each of those we do, and where there are overlap of competencies and rules and tasks, how to handle it, who will be the lead agency under different kind of disasters. These are, in fairness to the National Emergency Management Agency, over the years, they have actually produced documents of national response strategy and what to do, and who is the lead agency, if it's fire disaster, if it's flood disaster, if it's different. These documents are there. You know, so we just need to go back and use them and bring them to the fore. So many things have been left undone over the years. It's not as if some people have never given a thought to these things before. There's a big difference between doing and, verbalizing what to be done and then actually working out how it will be done and then ensuring that it's done. And when there is failure, ensuring that you enforce and that there are sanctions and punishment for the relation for malfeasance. You know, that's what we need to put in place. And just like any other sector, we need to just wake up as a people and know that, look, no nation can move forward where there is no guarantee of each citizen doing the right thing and doing his own bit in his own sector, in his own subsector, wherever he may find himself.
I did see, and I don't know whether you saw, I imagine that you saw them as well, the visuals of the critical infrastructure, the power line and the tower that was felled by these bandits. And it really bogs my mind as to why it is that some people will have the effrontery to be able to do that. I mean, ideally, you would think that people will be afraid that electricity could be running through that thing, and if it comes down in a way that people's lives, even the lives of those who are attacking these things, could be at risk. But it didn't matter that, that was actually a very dangerous exercise. They did it anyway. What runs through your mind when you see a visual like that? Are you concerned that, some people have gone beyond all fear? Is that they do not have any reasoning in that regard as to how even this could be a danger to their own lives?
Yes. Of course, thank you very much. I mean, like we said, that's looking at it normally. Now, we know that Nigeria has been in a state of this crisis, these security threats of insurgents, terrorists, and all of that for a while now. And for them, anything that will get the attention of government, it's like a nuisance value being put to work. Don't forget that terrorists often have either their action is expressive, they are pushing an agenda or an ideology, or it's instrumental, in which case maybe they have something to gain. But in this case, really, like you rightly said, I don't see what they want to gain in this other than just being disruptive and maybe displaying their nuisance value and expressing and perhaps making it difficult for government to work and the nation to function. Maybe there are some people who are happy putting us in this state. I mean, of course, ideologically, they really don't think they have anything to lose. That's what it means. And so, of course, if you are talking of insurgents who have the ideology of willing to even to die for what their chosen cause, then the idea of the danger involved is not even an issue for them. It's not. I mean, I remember as Commander Operation Safe Haven, I remember one of the occasion, one of the guys that was at that time, if you remember, in the early 2012, 10 to 12 to 13, where they were using the style of using vehicle-borne IEDs to blow up churches, blow up worship places, mosques, and all of that. Now, what they used to do is to tie the leg of the terrorist to the pedal of the car, such that it doesn't have a choice to even change his mind to say it's not doing again, or to say it's not delivering that load, that IED load. So he has to find, if he misses the target is meant to deliver it, he has to find a place to deliver it, and he's joyfully going to do it. With the anticipation, the hope that he's doing something for which he has something to gain, and there is an eternal reward for him. So when you have people with that kind of mindset, you can't take anything past them. I mean, anything that gives them that kind of fulfillment, we do. And that's why we have to also up our game to be ahead of them, both in strategic thinking and action.
All right, thank you very much. Major General Henry Ayola is a former commander, Special Task Force Operation Safe Haven. Thank you for coming in this morning and sharing your insights with us. Let's hope that this council will hit the ground running and pick up those documents, as you said, that are lying on the shelves.
Thank you very much, Nat'l. Thank you, Maupe. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Azeli will be back in a moment after a trip into the Business Morning studios on Sunrise Daily.
you and welcome. Well, it's the 4th week of November and it's winding down really fast. It's looking positive for Nigeria's stock market, which we have seen back-to-back gains this week already. So let's see if we're going to get another one today. The trading session has begun right now, but let's get to the top stories that set your agenda. Oil prices have risen marginally. Today's geopolitical concerns over escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine that countered the impact from a bigger than expected increase in U.S. crude inventory. So we've seen the impact on Brent, 0.2%. So we've seen Brent there trying to hold that $70 range, $72.97 a barrel, 0.2% up. On the flip side, the U.S. grade, that's the one, Dangote refinery, that's the one they like to import, and it's 0.2% down. So that's good for the refinery, $68.91 a barrel. So that's getting cheaper. We're still seeing pressure on oil prices right now. But let's get a check on the FX market. The close yesterday, we'll go to the FX market, but we'll see the NNPC Limited has launched a new crude oil grade. That's the Dangote blend on the global market. It was unveiled at the August European Crude Conference in London. The blend is praised for its low sulfur content and high value yield, attracting buyers from Europe and the US. NNPC E&P Managing Director Nicholas Fourcade says that production from the Dangote field in Akwa Ibom State has reached 40,000 barrels per day, with exports already underway. He adds that plans are also underway to increase output to 80,000 barrels per day by late 2025. This launch highlights NNPC's commitment to boosting Nigeria's crude production while prioritizing environmental sustainability and adding value to the global energy markets. And talking about the FX market now, we know we get most of our FX from that. From those are sales there with the crude oil, NAFEM, NFEM, 0.51% down. So we're still seeing weakness there. Was down by, for NAFEX, down about 2 naira 38 kobo. 0.14% down, closing at 1,681 naira to the dollar. That's for the NAFEX window, not far off from the NAFEM or the NFEM window from a previous trade of 1,678 naira. They're close to at 1,687. So trading has begun also in this market. Let's see if we still see volatility in that market. And yes, it's money sharing season, and a sum of shared of 1.41 trillion. That's what was shared between the federal, states, and local governments by the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee, FAC, as total revenue distribution for the month of October. The amount, which comprises of statutory revenue from value-added tax, excise duty, and other sources, is higher by 8.9% when compared with the 1.298 trillion naira distributed in September. A brief breakdown of the revenue allocation report released by the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation shows that the federal government received 433 billion naira. That's for the federal government. State governments received 490.69 billion naira. Local government councils, 355 billion naira. That was what they received. Then relevant states, 132.4 billion. 13% mineral derivation revenue, then gross statutory revenue, 1.36 trillion. Then we have the total distributable revenue of 1.411 trillion, and that's basically what was shared right there in the month of October. So other stories, the World Bank has awarded Imo State $4 million, so that's about 6.8 billion naira, for promoting accountability and improving the ease of doing business. The reward comes under the State Action on Business Enabling Reforms program, that's SABA. Imo State's Commissioner for Information, Honorable Declan Mulemba, who made this known at a press briefing in Owerri, says Imo is one of only 4 states in Nigeria to qualify for the award. The states were evaluated on land administration, regulatory frameworks for private investments in fiber optics, investment promotion services, and transparent government-to-business interactions. Take a listen.
There is no doubt that the manufacturing sector operates in a climate environment. Manufacturing performance continues to be constrained by high cost of these.
Apologies for that. That was the wrong one, but we're going to get that track ready for you. That's from the from Imo State there. Quite an impressive award, and definitely we hope more states, get that same award at this point, because that would generally impact on everything that's playing out in Nigeria. I'm sure we have that track now.
There are four major criteria, four major frameworks for assessing the states. And when the World Bank is satisfied that those state has met those criteria, he now rewards you with this handsome cash. And the criteria is based on, one, is the efficiency of land administration. Two, the regulatory framework for private investment in fiber optic infrastructure. Three, services provided by investment promotion agencies and public-private partnership units. And four, the efficiency and transparency of government-to-business services in participating states. All the investments that the governor has been making in terms of ensuring that there is good governance, all the trips he has been making to attract investors, and all the infrastructure he has been providing in the state to ensure that investments flow, they are paying off. And the results are what we are seeing.
All right, let's look at Nigeria's real estate sector now. It's been significantly influenced by a combination of inflation, currency devaluation, which has also impacted both domestic and foreign investments into the sector. In 2024, real construction growth rate, that dipped in the first quarter, but rose again in the second quarter. We saw a recovery there. Data from the NBS. So there was a major drop right here in 2020. That was the second quarter of 2020. Q3 got a recovery. Then fast forward all the way to 2024. Q1, we saw that dip there. Then a recovery for the second quarter of 2024. Then if you also look at prices of real estate, because of what we've seen with inflation and currency devaluation, also being an import-dependent economy. If you look at the property prices so far in the likes of, let's say, if you're trying to get a detached house in maybe Adeni Jones now in Ikeja, that's highbrow, that ranges from about 350 million naira. If you're looking at detached in, say, Ogba, 250 million naira. And these prices were not like this. When the exchange rate was pegged at around 400 to 300 naira to the dollar. So these were maybe ranging around 50 to 60 million. But with the devaluation we've seen so far, then if you come all the way to Lekki Phase 1, 750 million. That's the going range for detached house. Then areas after Lekki Phase 1, let's say Orchid Road area, that's attracting a massive 300 million if you're trying to buy in those parts. Then maybe low end, the low end area, somewhere like Ojodu is now commanding between 100 to 250 million naira for a detached house. And definitely a lot of conversations around, the mortgage system in Nigeria. That's been plagued by high interest rates because we have the central bank on one hand, trying to tame inflation, and they've been raising rates, for the longest time, and also trying to mop up excess liquidity from the Nigerian economy. And definitely that has impacted on most of these prices. How are Nigerians able to access affordable mortgage to actually make this happen? But let's have this conversation now. We have Modupe Andros, ESV Modupe Andros is the MD CEO, Nat'l Mills Limited, and she's joining me right here in the studio. It's great to have you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm sorry, I know the traffic that held you. It caught me, coming to the office myself, but finally, you made it here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So a lot playing out in this market. Looking at these prices, as a salary earner, I'm wondering how I'm going to be able to afford this, even with the kind of mortgage system that we run in Nigeria right now. It's we have interest rates from 25 to over 30% at this point. So that's looking like I cannot afford a mortgage at this point. So how are you seeing the sector, so far in 2024?
Well, we're in very unprecedented times in Nigeria at the moment, and the real estate sector, I can say that Nigeria is playing in a very moderate growth at the moment. Even with the challenges that we have in Nigeria, we're in a very moderate growth. And I'll say a moderate growth because with the devaluation of the Naira, it's giving the people in the diaspora opportunities to want to invest in Nigeria. And because they have a stronger currency, a lot of demands are coming in. However, because the cost of building materials have significantly increased, developers have to increase the prices of properties, which also would mean that the local people are unable to afford these properties at the moment. But because of the devaluation as well, investors are looking at shifting investments into real estate because real estate is growing astronomically. And then when we look at all the major urban areas in Nigeria, Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt, for instance, with some of the infrastructure development that is ongoing in Nigeria, new roads, the bridge going from all the way from Lagos all the way to Cross Rivers and all of that, it enhances development. But developers are going through a lot of headaches right now because they have to increase the prices of their properties significantly. And with property increase, I'm wondering, what's demand really looking at? You did mention, diaspora, they have stronger currency at this point, so they're able to pour that in. I'll tell you, the demand is high. The demand is growing because, just like I mentioned earlier, people's investment, people are shifting. There's a paradigm shift. People are shifting from the stocks market and some of the forms of investment that they've keyed into, and they're trying to secure their funds in the real estate market because the real estate market, in terms of stability, is stable. It might not give you enough liquidity immediately, but it's appreciating. So there's a demand from people that have access to funds already from the diaspora market and investors, local investors. Right, and talking about everyone's trying to beat inflation at this point and also try to beat currency devaluation, most investors, in this country. So, we keep touting different asset classes as that inflation hedge. Yes. Is real estate in Nigeria still that? Oh, certainly. Real estate in Nigeria, in terms of inflation, the inflation would affect real estate in all ways. Like I said, developers are finding it difficult to buy materials, building materials at the cost in which they used to buy these materials for initially. Now they're buying it at a higher cost. Inflation has come to play in that regard. However, and then the rental values have gone up significantly because it's a ripple effect. When the cost of a property goes up, the return on investment on that property has to be able to be commensurate with the value at which you're buying the property. So the rental values for the property have gone up. But the supply of properties in comparison with the demand in property right now, considering that we have a minimum of 20 million housing deficit, not to talk of the number of people that we have not put into the population census, So the investors will consider buying because they know there's a high demand, which would also be affected in terms of inflation. Right, and I was speaking to someone earlier, and he did tell me his landlord increased his rent, recently, citing, the same issues at this point. So it's like sitting tenants are not having that privilege at this point, because most of the time, a sitting tenant would be, afforded some, good value, when it comes to rent. But now we're seeing the landlords having to hike, even on sitting tenants. They're not waiting to kick them out and getting new tenants. So we are vast in property management. So when you talk about sitting tenants and new tenants, we're in the core of it in my organization. So sitting tenants are also affected, even though incoming tenants are significantly affected because they have no choice. But a sitting tenant can negotiate his ways, well, if he has a considerate landlord.
Maybe good behavior.
Not necessarily. He shouldn't have a relationship that will show character behavior on his property. Having said that, owners and investors, they are also looking at increasing prices because of inflation, devaluation of the naira, the use of the funds. What your money can buy for you now is like 50% of what he could buy for you a couple of months ago. I'm not talking about a year ago. We have a project that we're marketing at the moment, and would you believe that the price of that project has increased on 3 occasions? And it has not been delivered yet. So everybody has to meet up with the cost of funds. So a landlord might have international commitments, and he would also look at the cost of the funds that he's getting from the property that is on rent. Right.
So definitely challenging times in that market, and I love the way developed economies track their housing markets. At least in the U.S., most of the week we're getting household housing data most of the time. But here we're still trying to get our fingers on data when it comes to new developments and sales and all of that. So looking at 2024. Generally, would you say realtors, did they cash out in 2024?
Or did investors cash out?
Right.
Not realtors. We are just middlemen, right, if you would say so. So every year, there's a reason why there's an increase in demand for real estate. In 2024, the devaluation, the inflation has caused a ripple effect in the demand for real estate. However, a majority of Nigerians cannot afford this real estate. Like you mentioned earlier, mortgages are not, they're nowhere to be getting close to, because you're getting a minimum of 30% on a mortgage from a commercial bank. So I will say to you that even if it feels like investors are cashing out in terms of real estate purchase, increase in the value of the property, you also need to understand that the value at which they are buying the property now is astronomically high. So we're looking at properties in Lekki 1 going at 750 million for a detached house. Meanwhile, a year ago, there's probably a 200 million less on that same property. So the purchasing power of people has not increased. So I don't call it cashing out. I just feel that, I believe that people are buying because there is a lot of uncertainty, and they're trying to hold on to their funds and make sure that their funds don't devalue anymore. Right, and we know shelter. Very, very important in the scheme of things. Certainly. Well, thank you so much. It was great having your perspective. ESV Modukwe and just is the MD CEO, Rider Mills Limited, and she made it regardless of the traffic. Thank you so much. That is part of the infrastructure deficit we're talking about. Exactly. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you for having me. All right, we'll take a quick break now. When we come back, we head on to the commodities market. That's the moment. Just stay with us. All right, so we know the Dangote refinery, one of the largest and most anticipated projects in Africa, has made headlines once again, this time with a significant shift in its crude oil sourcing strategy. After a 3-month hiatus, the refinery has resumed importing crude oil from the United States. Let's talk to Dumebi Oluwole now, senior economist at FDC. Great to have you, Dumebi. So why has Dangote refinery decided to resume importing crude oil from the U.S.? I know I saw WTI earlier, still sub $70.
Yes, I mean, from all indications, it's not exactly clear as to why the refinery has gone that route, but it is very clear that there is some level of supply shortages from local sources, because if the refinery decides to opt for importing, crude oil for them to refine and at least meet up with their production, making sure that they're able to produce at full capacity at their targeted timeline, which is by the end of this year, going into Q1 2025, what it means is that they're probably not getting enough from local sources, and they're forced to meet their supply gap with imported crude. And remember that I think the last time I came when I spoke about Dangote's refining capacity and how much the crude oil that the NNPC was going to be supplying them, which was about 400,000 barrels. 400,000 barrels of crude oil. Comparing that to their capacity, you can already see that there is a shortfall. There's a shortfall in there, and more importantly, when you see how much they're able to refine from that amount of crude oil, you see that it's very low. It's about 20 liters, thereabout, 20 million liters rather, 20 million liters of refined petroleum crude. And when you compare that with Nigeria's, domestic demand and the fact that Dangote is trying to increase its production to not serve only Nigeria but also export to other neighboring African countries, with Ghana inclusive, you can see that there is a shortfall in supply that would eventually lead them not be able to produce as much refined petroleum to meet domestic demand and also their exports. So I would say this is more of like a necessity right now that would have definitely spurred Dangote to eventually opt for importing.
Right, and FYI, Dumebi would have been here in the studio if not for the traffic coming to the studio today, but that's why Dumebi is joining us via Zoom. But now, talking about the Naira for crude oil deal, how does that impact, Dangote's sourcing decision so far?
I mean, on the surface, what it's supposed to do is generally reduce the foreign exchange overhead, right, for Dangote, because the expectation is that if you're paying in Naira, it reduces the demand for dollars and reduces the operating cost for the company, right? So that's on the part for Dangote. For the economy in general, when you consider how much, FX will be needed to service all of these imported all of the operations for the Dangote refinery. That's a huge FX, demand that will be coming from the refinery to meet those payments. And if the central bank and also the federal government is able to hedge on that to reduce the amount of pressure on Nigeria's FX market, it's obviously a welcome situation. So I would say those are like the two key implications right now for the in terms of the Naira for crude deal. For Dangote, basically it somewhat reduces their overhead costs, especially for foreign exchange related expenses. And for the federal government and with the CBN inclusive, it kind of reduces the demand for foreign exchange in Nigeria's FX market. And so to an extent, it's supposed to, somewhat support or help the Naira when we're looking at it from the demand side.
All right, is there any advantage for the Dangote refinery when it comes to shipping costs from the U.S. Gulf Coast?
I would say right now the key thing, especially when you read the news briefing on why the refinery has opted for this, number one, when you build a huge infrastructure like this, when you have plans to ensure that it runs at its full capacity, it has to run at full capacity so that your infrastructure doesn't start getting redundant, right? That's one of the reasons why we see that refineries always have to run at their full capacity, except if at that point in time it's not supposed to run at its full capacity. But the Dangote refinery has gotten to a point where it's supposed to start running at its full capacity. And for that to happen, they need those supplies, right? So that's exactly why this is happening. It's basically to ensure that the targets that the refinery has set for itself is able to meet those targets, meet the demand that it's supposed to service, both on a domestic level and a regional level, right? So there's also the competitive aspect of it when you look at what is happening in terms of the global economy, right? The global refining markets, right? And you see that Dangote, purchasing crude oil from the U.S. and also refining and possibly exporting as well. There's some competitive edge that Dangote gets in that regard, because now it will be a global player in terms of providing refined petroleum, resources to not only, West African markets, but possibly other European European or Latin American markets, right? So there's that benefit there. Then the other thing to also consider is the cost as well of WTI. So WTI is pretty much cheaper than Brent, and when you look at the current trend of global oil prices, and if Dangote is getting WTI, remember that these prices are locked in the future, so it's almost like basically forward contracts. And if you look at the current trend of WTI over the past couple of days, you see that it has been significantly lower than Brent. And since Dangote will be expecting a shipment at around December 5 from Chevron Corp, what this means is that they have been able to somewhat get it at a lower price, compared to the cost of Brent on a global scale. So to an extent, it's kind of, number one, they're able to meet their meet the requirements for their refinery to meet its full production, right? So they're able to now eventually produce refined petroleum refined petroleum goods, and then service the domestic market and also the other regional markets that will need this product, right? So they are basically getting those products to sell and make revenue. At the same time, you also consider the competitive edge that they would get, being a global player now in the refinery market, amongst other players in Europe, and the US. So then you now consider the final thing of cost, when they're importing WTI compared to Brent.
All right, maybe I guess the refining drama continues in Nigeria, but thank you so much. Always great to have you, Dumebi Oluwole. She's a senior economist at FDC. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so the markets are open right now. We'll give you a summary of what's playing out at intraday. That's 1 p.m. on Business Incorporated. That's it from me on Business Morning. I hand things over to the Sunrise Daily team.
Welcome back. Of course, you've had an idea of what's going on in the business world. Let's look at what's going on, not just within the shores. Yes, we're going to talk about what's happening within the shores of Nigeria. Let's step out a little bit. Our president's done a bit of traveling, as some will say, shuttle diplomacy across the world. And he's had some, what they say, very productive meetings. Certain relationships have been revived and strengthened here and there. We've had some other government officials visit Nigeria as well, all for diplomatic relations and bilateral talks. But in all of these things, how's it affecting Nigeria and her people? Well, to help us in this conversation, we have in the studio Professor Ademola Abbas, a global affairs expert and international law expert. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Let's start from that general perspective. So we've seen our president move around a great deal, ECOWAS, AU, and then the world out there. And finally, G20, which just happened, and we have representation at COP29 and all of that. In all of that, how would you shape the president's, as some would say, shuttle diplomacy travels?
But thank you once again for having me. Look, I think it's always very interesting when you have a president who thrives, so to say, on multilateralism, engaging with international partners, global fora. And we've seen President Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu do that a lot, to be honest, as we've just brilliantly captured in terms of his movement between African Union, with ECOWAS, is the COP29 in Azerbaijan, is it Rio de Janeiro with the G20 that just concluded, and so on and so forth. And he has also done individual travels to France and other countries. Even when he took holidays, he was supposed to be working holiday and this and that. So the country should be should be glad that we have a president that understands the power of shuttle diplomacy, as you've said. But beyond that, though, is we have to start asking a serious question: is what do we intend to gain from all these collaborations, from all these engagements that Nigeria is having overseas, so that it doesn't become traveling for travel's sake, but it becomes something that we can come back with and say, look, I've been to here, I've been here, this and this and this are the consequences that I have. Being shuttle diplomacy, obviously, you're going to have some presence, some awareness, create some awareness about your country globally, and these we're best to do it than these massive international fora. So I think it's something that should be commended as far as creating awareness for Nigeria is concerned.
It's interesting that you say that Nigerians should be glad, and we have a president who thrives on this. But, as I did raise yesterday in conversation with one of the president's Senior Special Assistant on Protocol. I was saying that when we look at the credentials of President Bola Tinubu, shuttle diplomacy, or diplomacy is not one of them, it's not one of his strengths. So there have been questions as to how he's fared really in this particular regard, especially when you look at the shaky start he's had as head of ECOWAS and the crisis that immediately greeted ECOWAS when he started. Do you think he's beginning to really get a hang of it and being able to assert himself and also Nigeria's presence on the international stage?
Well, thank you, Mark. I think that's a very brilliant question. Look, you're absolutely right. Let's be honest. In terms of the president's forte you refer to, and the mention of ECOWAS. Look, if you look at what happened during ECOWAS, I think the presidency, I would say, of Nigeria hastily drew a red line for the crisis happening in West Africa, which I thought at that point in time was a very bad idea. I work for African Union as an expert on African Union. I drafted the Treaty for African Union in terms of peace and security. I worked with ECOWAS before. I worked with United Nations. You do not do that hastily. Obama did that, for instance, in Syria, when he talked about the use of nuclear weapon, chemical weapon, at that point in time during the internal crisis of Syria, when he drew a red line and he wasn't able to follow up. So you have to be very careful in drawing it. So it's normal for presidents or heads of state to take step forward with the wrong foot, either because of their enthusiasm to grapple with whatever comes before them without having the full benefit of counseling that they should have, either from continental players or from their own particular. I think that was what happened at that point in time. But look, I think the presidency or the president realized that we need to do things differently and embark on this diplomatic charm. That's why I said that we need to be glad for that in terms of at least pushing us forward there. So I think I would say, at least it seems that Nigeria has realized that there is a lot of good thing to be derived from at least pushing our agenda forward, engaging diplomatically with international community greater than we probably ever did. So you are right in saying that the president seems to have realized that. I would agree with that thinking.
How big would you say that interpersonal relationships matter on this fort? Because we've seen, I mean, I did make reference to the president's experience. You did not particularly address that in terms of, his experience before now on the international stage. One president whom we did see, never mind the fact that they are loggerheads now, especially when you consider his recent attacks on the administration, President Obasanjo. I mean, people know that he's not just a Nigerian figure, he is an African figure. He's got relationships, that span even beyond the continent of Africa. I do not know how that affects his own, his own posturing in terms of pushing the Nigerian agenda, on the African continent and also outside the African continent.
Well, thank you, Mark. I did not just, sidestep that question you asked me. It's because you already mentioned the fact that that was not part of President Asiwaju's sort of a forte. But that is not, it's not a minus at all. And I'll tell you, you did mention President Obasanjo. President Obasanjo was a military head of state. He had trainings overseas. Well, beyond that, when he was the head of state, in Nigeria, he had a lot of engagement with, and that was at a point Nigeria was just stepping out also. And Pan-Africanism, remember, from Murtala Mohammed, was the bulwark of our international relations. So any head of state at that point in time will have to do that, number one. Number two, Obasanjo governed Nigeria from 1976 to 78, thereabout, or 79, thereabout, when most of Africa was still battling with colonialism. So as the head of state of Africa's largest country, Africa's largest country in terms of population, and towards whom the rest of Africa looked to for kind of support. And the role we played in Zimbabwe, in Southern Rhodesia, the role we played in South Africa. Obasanjo was a part of the EPWU, Eminent Persons of the World, that was very critical in also freeing Mandela in fighting for the end of apartheid. So the critical moment that Obasanjo found himself in Nigerian politics or leadership from 1970 to 78 on the first instance, and then when we birthed democracy in 1999, gave him a unique opportunity to be able to play that role. Actually, would have done the same thing. Anybody would have done the same thing if you are trusted into the power at that point in time. Now, so when you take a step back, Ashwaji was a governor of Lagos State for about 8 years. Then he was a senator. Those were not two platforms that would give anybody the opportunity to be able to do massive global sort of diplomacy that he's doing now. But now he understands at this critical moment of Nigeria, Nigeria, when it came, Nigeria needed a leader. Just like, let's go back a bit when Obama became the president in America, for the first time he became president. The world was in dire need of somebody who could take America out of what America became then, very isolated kind of country that we saw. So at that point, in 2023, we needed a president at least that would take Nigeria to begin to project us beyond what we did then. So that's why I said that it's not, I don't think it will be a minus in his personality that he didn't do that before. But at least for now, history has made it possible for him to be able to do that, which was missing from his original spread.
You just pointed to the United States of America. We know that the appointment of a Secretary of State is something that is very critical to them. I mean, that's where presidents get to, even if they do not have that strong. That's not an area of strength for them. The Secretary of State's appointment is usually very critical to how the United States is positioned in terms of how it does its relations. In our own instance, would you say that there are levers that we have really leveraged on to be able to, that the president is really relying on to be able to, make the most of this international outings as is out there?
Well, look, this will be in two ways, to be honest, or two levels, internal and external. Internally, I'm happy you mentioned the role of the Secretary of State in America, which will be our own Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Indeed.
Basically, just like the Minister. So you need somebody who can project the image of the country. I think the current Minister for Foreign Affairs, Nigeria's Ambassador Tuga, who I know personally, when he was Nigeria's ambassador to Germany, and I had the cause to lead a team of Lagos State functionaries to Germany, and I met with him. He's a fine gentleman who I think he knows what he's doing completely. He's a brilliant mind. So I think, and I think that's why we are beginning to see the level of international engagement. A couple of weeks ago, India, Prime Minister was in Nigeria, and that was the first time an Indian president will come to Nigeria in 17 years. I'm sure you know. Now we just also were present at what is it called, G20. And don't forget, Nigeria is not a member of G20. We were invited by Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, who was the outgoing president of G20 itself. That can only increase Nigeria's quest for permanent membership of G20 itself. But beyond that also is that Nigeria, as like about 2 or 3 other African countries, are also jostling to become permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So it was good for Nigeria to be at the G20, because at the end of the day, you are going to be talking to powerful players within the UN General Assembly and UN Security Council who must have your back when you're going to be vying for that particular seat. That's Nigeria and South Africa and Egypt, at least in Africa, so much covet. So that's what I say, it's both external and internal. So internal, I think we're doing a bit, but we can do a lot more. And I think I said this in my last interview here, that we need to put, I think that was when we were talking about the crisis in terms of Chinese companies going after Nigerians' property and this and that. We need to put our finest mind in places that can actually, project the country's image. I'm not saying we don't do that, but I'm saying we can do a lot more than we seem to have done this.
In one of the things, or one of the statements the president was quoted as making out there, was that the need to fight hunger and poverty. He spoke at the G20. One would then ask, South Africa, and when South Africa became a member, there was that hue and cry, why is it not Nigeria? Why is it South Africa that's out there? Again, you talked about him being there and how it will galvanize Nigeria's movement towards a permanent membership. But some will say, okay, it's done and dusted. What's the outlook? Would you say his statements there and the meetings he's held there would in any way give impetus to that drive to become permanent members?
Well, thank you very much. Let me start with the South Africa being a member and we are not a member.
And now they are the president.
Yeah, they are the president. I listen to that a lot. You see, we seem to confuse things a lot, and we seem to argue too much emotionally in Nigeria when we're talking about facts and figures. South Africa's population is about 1/3 of Nigeria's population. But today, South Africa and Egypt are the largest economies in Africa, albeit just this year, we understand that. But in terms of other indices that global players look at, fight against corruption, transparency, governance, this and that, South Africa is way ahead of us. Don't let's kid ourselves. And these are things that matter when you want to be critical players in international fora. So the fact that South Africa, with 1/3 of Nigeria's population, is accepted as a G20 member, the only country in Africa, by the way, that is in G20, and the only country that is still in BRICS, which is, an offshoot of G20, tells you that you don't need 250 million people to get serious international attention. What is the power of brain than brawn, basically, if you can put it in that way, not in any cheeky manner. So when people are just talking, oh, Nigeria is 250 million, why should South Africa with 70-something million be there? We are not there. Nobody's just looking at how many you are. You know, there was a time, I think a country won, I think a small country won Miss World, and I was joking with a friend that, you know, so what is so special, this and that. And people told me what, you know, mention a country with about 1-point-something billion people that never won it anyway. It's just to tell me that it's not about just the numerical strength. So globally, they are looking at countries that at least, you know, respect the rule of law, you know, understand what global governance means in terms of fight against corruption, in terms of transparency, creating ease of doing business. So that is one thing we have not done very well in Nigeria. We can't kid ourselves. And that is why South Africa probably will be a favorite in that. But beyond that is the fact that that doesn't mean, though, that Nigeria cannot aspire to be a member of G20, permanent member. And that's why I said earlier on that the president's move actually is going to help a lot. At least Nigeria was invited, you know, as a guest, you know, by Lord Silva. That is going to help our case. And you mentioned the fight against hunger and poverty. You know, on the very first day of G20, Brazil adopted the Global Alliance, you know, to fight hunger and poverty. And Nigeria endorsed that, which was a very good thing to do. We endorsed that we are going to be a critical player. And that is another advantage, another benefit of the participation in G20 by Nigeria. It will give us at least a platform to be able to engage with other international players on the very critical issue of hunger and poverty. And make no mistake, that was deliberate, because if you understand, Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, who just left as the president of G20, nothing is more dear to his heart than the question of hunger and poverty. If you remember the way he grew up, he was a cobbler, you know, cobbler's son and this and that. So I think for that sake, I think the president, you know, engaging with that is very, very important. Then he also made, the President Tinubu made a declaration, you know, he made a challenge to his colleagues in the G20. And he reeled out what Nigeria wanted, actually, in terms of support, global support for our SMEs, you know, for this, for that, which I think was a good thing to do. But overall, the G20 itself is heavy, you know, on general declarations, but very light on specifics. Because the G20 is, look, it's almost doomed.
But if I may interrupt you. So
almost doomed, why?
I want to say it's almost doomed in terms of what it can achieve with this particular year's summit. Because don't forget, it's taking place at the background, in the shadow of Donald Trump coming back as the US president. Donald Trump has a natural disdain for multilaterality. We saw that in his very first time, when he distanced the United States, which is the most critical player in NATO. And again, don't forget, before G20, you had Azerbaijan, which is already comatose, because there was no agreement on COP29 about how to raise the almost $1 trillion they need to be able to pay developing countries. For this gas whatsoever. So the problem is, and you know, Trump does not really do deal. He doesn't really buy into this environmental
climate change.
That's why I'm saying that the outcome of this year's G20 is going to struggle, because of the fact that you're going to have a president in America, which one of the most, if not, is the most pivotal player. Let's be honest. And Russia was not in G20, wasn't present there. Don't forget, it's a member, but wasn't there for many reasons that we understand. So Russia was not there. US is not. You are sure US is not going to play ball. G20 was declared on three prongs, multi-dimensions of sustainable development: economics, social, environmental. America will not do environmental under Trump, right? Economic, we are already in trouble. Social, we have upheaval all over the place. Look at the regional crisis in the Middle East. You know, Hezbollah here, Hamas there, and Israel. Look at Ukraine and Russia. And that is why I said the G20 summit, if care is not taken, may not be able to achieve anything.
So, sorry, Nyota, if I may, I just wanted to quickly take up this. Well, the G20 might not offer much. Well, we're still looking for, and for some people say that maybe it's a carrot that they keep dangling anyway, membership of G20, a permanent seat in the UN. While we're looking to expand, you know, our turf in these areas of international relations, let's take a look at the president's, will I say his entourage, and whether there is something that could come of some bilateral relations. Because he was invited by President Lula da Silva of Brazil. So I imagine that beyond, attending the G20, I want to think that Nigeria also stands to gain by, engaging bilaterally with Brazil. And it would seem that that also was the thinking with the president's team, looking at the fact that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yusuf Tuga, was there, the Minister of Livestock Development, Idi Mukhtar Meha, and the Minister of Art, Tourism and Culture and Creativity, Hanatu Musawa. Minister of Agriculture was also there, Minister of State, beg your pardon, and also the National Intelligence Agency Director, General Ambassador Mohammed. These are the people that followed the president. So I'm wondering, what can we think of, and what do you think can be the outcomes of the bilateral engagement that could happen or should have happened on the side of the G20 summit?
Well, thank you very much, Maupri. I think you hit the nail on the head there. That is very important. We must not lose sight of that. I think one thing Nigeria can do, to borrow the title of Arunda Roy's novel a few years ago, is to be a god of small things at the end of the day. The big thing is the G20, but the small things, as Ferrari put it, they are the sort of low-hanging fruit, the side meetings you can have on bilateral level. And what you just read out is a very critical part of our cabinet, so to say, that could do that, could bet that. It also was very interesting that Modi left Nigeria for Brazil for that particular meeting. It was good that he came here first before he went there. So again, Nigeria could carry that relationship with Brazil over there, and with India over there. Brazil, the hosting country, also invited Nigeria. So you could see, and Nigeria has a lot of things to learn from these countries, from India in terms of food security, counter-terrorism, in terms of technology and so on and so forth. From Brazil, the same thing, but much more so in terms of environmental protection, as an example. Brazil is the home to the world's largest Amazon forest, as you know, and they're doing a fantastic deal, on that. And don't forget, Joe Biden did not only attend that summit, he also visited Amazon, becoming the first sitting president in America to visit the Amazon. That is very important. So Nigeria has, a very huge opportunity to be able to do that. And that's to leverage on all those opportunities afforded by that particular group or G20 summit, to be able to pursue unilateral and bilateral relationships in terms of investment, FDI, foreign direct investment into Nigeria. Having said that, however, let's forget that Nigeria is not in short of people who want to invest in the country. I ran investment for Lagos for 4 years, and I knew how many potential fantastic investors we could have had in Lagos. But at the end of the day, part of the problem is not having an enabling environment for them to be able to do business. When you have multi, tax regimes, when you have, a lot of bottlenecks in terms of bureaucracies and this and that, it pisses everybody off at the end of the day. No investor is interested in that. So it's not so much of how many of these side deals you can do, how many people you can talk to. What is important is when it comes to the crunch, your country can show that it is able and ready for these people to come and do business in your country. I think that for me is very important.
Indeed, that's the question I was going to ask you. I mean, if the G20 is all about all those conversations, and then the things that you do in-house, if your house is not clean, will they be willing to come in? So now that the G20 is done, we've seen the entourage the president went with, and of course, they've had the conversations. What do you think needs to be done in-house to create accountability, transparency, the kind of environment needed for all of these conversations to, settle and bear fruit, if we could describe it?
Thanks for that. As I've always said, I said it on this platform and other places over and over. Whenever people are attacking, not just President Asiwaju or this current government, even previous governments, I've always told them, look, you have to learn to separate the wheat from the chaff. Some of the policies of the current government, do we need those policies? As far as I'm concerned, we do need them. We need them. No country can be using 95% of its GDP to service debt and last much longer. You need those ones. No question about it. Do we need to remove subsidy? All the candidates agree we need them. What is important, though, to your question, is that when we are putting policies out, and I'll bring into it, when you are asking people to come and invest in your country, there are things you need to do to make them want to come to this country and invest. When you want to when you are telling people that my government means well for you, then I must see that I must look at you and believe that not by what you are telling me, but what you are doing. So if you have political leadership living recklessly, living lives that living lives that do not mirror what the majority of Nigerians are living today, nobody's going to take us serious. We don't even take ourselves seriously. Because if a politician comes to me today and talks to me about the need for me to tighten my belt and this and that, and I'm looking at you are buying an SUV of 200 million naira a day, you are earning 35 million naira in office and this and that, I'll be looking at, are you really feeling my pain? So if I don't take you seriously as a Nigerian within the country, how much more somebody that is coming from outside the country? And a perfect example of that was what we saw in the botched relationship between Ogun State and the Chinese industry and the whole upla that it threw up in our face. Nigeria should not be, at that level today that, just companies, even if you are multinational, or even individual nationals, human beings of another country, they're going to be attacking your property all over the place. But the truth is, as the Yorubas adage say, I won't say it in Yoruba, is that if you're an elder and you belt yourself with a corn belt, then you make yourself a ridiculous object for the hens to come and peck at. Pure and simple. Nigeria is lowering itself too much. We are ridiculing ourselves, and that is what we need to stop. Nobody will take us seriously if we continue on this trajectory.
All right. Thank you very much. Professor Ademola Abbas is a global affairs expert and international law expert. Thank you for speaking with us this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that is where we'll have drawn the curtains for this morning. I want to say thank you for letting us be a part of your morning. Of course, you'll be thinking about the feedback tomorrow.
Indeed. Tomorrow is Friday. We'll sit on the producer's neck.
Thank you so much. I'm Nat'l.
Thank you. Wishing you a very productive day. I'm Mal Pelgrim.